Okay, so we're going over the different sides of the Reconstruction, making sure that anybody who has missed any of this information can get the information that they don't have and prepare for open note test. So there's two sides to this question. One is Reconstruction was a success in helping make ex-slaves and our country more democratic. And then there's the other side where Reconstruction was a failure and it did not help ex-slaves, and our country did not make much progress towards a more democratic country. So on the positive side, there was pieces of evidence like the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery, very significant. Sherman's field order, which gave abandoned land to ex-slaves. The Freedmen's Bureau, which helped ex-slaves by giving them clothing, built schools to teach them how to read and write, and also sent agents to negotiate labor disputes. That means helping them make sure that they're getting fair pay when they're working, because they demanded to get pay because they said, hey, slavery's over, thanks to the 13th Amendment. And so agents like Twitchell went to the rural communities and helped them out, told them about their rights, helped them when there was issues. In Congress, there was the radical Republicans who believed in restructuring society, and they really were at the forefront and really the ones driving Reconstruction to be a true changeover of society. Reconstruction, this word really is supposed to mean that, you're changing society and really changing it over. And so in this way, it's supposed to be about helping those ex-slaves get the rights that they didn't have before. So while they are fighting for rights in Congress, there are other schools that are being opened. People from the North who really wanted to help the ex-slaves came down to the South and taught them how to read and write, and schools opened up all over. And they continued to demand fair wages. In Congress, the 14th Amendment was passed, which made African Americans full citizens and equal protection under the law. The 15th Amendment gave African Americans the right to vote, and they were encouraged and given the opportunity to become involved in politics, Congress, and they did. There were people like John Lynch and Tunis Campbell who ran and were represented, who were the bosses. They were the sheriffs. They were on school boards. They were in their state legislature, which means they wrote state constitutions. They wrote state laws. And then they also were senators in our national Congress, helping to fashion laws. They taught other people about their rights. They helped communicate. They helped be a part of restructuring society. And so that was extremely successful. And then just the idea that voting was a spiritual experience, because it meant so much to the ex-slaves that they had gone from being considered pieces of property to be considered full citizens with the freedom and the rights that they had. Unfortunately, there were a lot of struggles and a lot of ways that after 1870 things started to fall apart. Before 1870, even, Andrew Johnson was a Southerner who really didn't care, and he was our president before he got impeached. He didn't care about the rights for ex-slaves. In his view of Reconstruction, he was focused on pardoning the Southerners, giving them their land back, which really meant that then the planters took all the free land that Sherman had given them, and so they created the sharecroppers contract, because now these ex-slaves didn't have any land. A sharecropping contract means that you're farming on somebody else's land, you're renting it out. You're supposed to be given at least 50% of the profits. You're supposed to split the profits, so the planter gets half of it and you get half of it. But the problem is the planter gets to sell all of the crops. And so let's say, because when you started, you needed to borrow seed, you needed to borrow fertilizer, you needed to borrow the plow. You needed to get food for your family. You needed to get clothing for your family, shoes. You had nothing because you were enslaved. So let's say you borrowed all of that, and that took you to about like $300 in rented materials. And let's say your cotton does super well that year, and in reality you really probably got $600 or $700 in cotton profit. So, if you subtract the 300, if you divide it in half, you're supposed to get 350. Well, if you subtract all of the costs that you had, you're only left with $50. Unfortunately, you were the planter was the one who sold your crops. So they would lie and they would say, well, your profits were only $650. And that meant that when you divide that in half, or $600, when you divide it in half, you would get, technically you're supposed to get $300. We already borrowed $300, so now you broke even. So now after a year of toiling, of fixing fences and everything, you have nothing. So what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to borrow money again to get food and clothing and shoes and seed and fertilizer from your planter. And let's say that he's a really mean planter. He would say, well, I sold the cotton for $400. So split that in half, that would be $200. Well, you owe me $300. So now you've got a negative $100 at the beginning of the year. If this happens year after year, guess what happens? You now owe $200, $300 every single year. You're multiplying your debt, and you're coming out behind. What if there was a strong wind that year and your fences got damaged? They might take money off of your things. You might be out another $200. They could charge you for whatever they wanted. They could damage things behind your back or in the dead of the night, and then create the system of debt. Some people called it another form of slavery. Some people called it worse than slavery, because you had to pay for your food, your housing, and you weren't any better off than you were when you were enslaved. Another really sad thing, so that was a way that they took the 13th Amendment and you ended slavery, and yet there was a lot of failures and a lot of ways that they could take that away from you. Under the 14th Amendment, you're supposed to be full citizens and you're supposed to be equal protection under the law. Unfortunately, people really didn't get equal protection under law. There was a lot of really inconsistencies, a lot of people not really protected. And there was a lot of Jim Crow laws that separated people. And those laws were called Jim Crow laws, and it meant segregated facilities like schools, hospitals, and they always got less money. Sometimes you were banned from certain ones. I know that St. Mary's in Richmond Heights apparently banned people for a long time. Railroad cars and back of the bus, those sections of different things. And that was a way that people were taking away that equal protection. They were making you feel not like a citizen. Another way that they made you not feel like a citizen and take your 14th and 15th Amendment was the vigilante groups that were groups of terrorists who were in alliance with the Southern farmers and the ideas. They raised fear in former slaves. They threatened to kill people or killed people who voted and people around them. They would threaten and kill American Europeans who tried to stick up for those of the KKK. There was one point where soldiers were sent down to South Carolina to stop the violence in the KKK, and a mob went after a Union soldier. and tried to kill him too because he was trying to help these African Americans. So, if you didn't want to disappear, you didn't show up at the polls. If you spoke up and complained about your unfair sharecropper, they would, kill you if you didn't get out of town quick enough. You also had some laws like the literacy test, which said that you had to be able to read and write in order to vote, and you had to pay a poll tax if you wanted to vote, which decreased the amount of people who were allowed to vote. So the KKK and other organizations were not the only way that they went after people. And the way that they were super unfair about it was by the grandfather clauses, which said that you didn't have to take, if your grandfather wasn't an ex-slave, then you didn't have to take the literacy test and the poll taxes. Some people got really fed up, so they prevented the ex-slaves from leaving by tearing up their tickets, by terrorizing them, canceling trains. So you had to go to incredible lengths to get to the North because people were really fed up. The other thing that we talked about today in class was a concept called redlining, which meant that the Housing and Loan Corporation, the United States government, mandated that banks not give loans to fix up people's houses or move if you lived in the red zones, which was where the predominantly African American people were living. If you were in the yellow zone, they may or may not give you a loan. Those areas were considered less great, but they weren't as, quote, quote, devalued or as forbidden. And this is a map of St. Louis, but redlining occurred in every city, so you can find redlining maps in multiple cities. The green area is Clayton. This is Forest Park. The blank areas are either industrial, undeveloped, or a park. This is Bell Fountain Cemetery right here. So if you zoom in, you can see a lot more clear. The street names, they're written. So right here is Lindell Boulevard. So you can see how places like Westminster in certain sections were considered to be in red zones. But then as you, and this is all around the city and close to the downtown area, here's Vandevenner. So this is right around where SLU is to this day, in this kind of zone. Then if you take Lindell, you get into the blue zones and green zones. Washington Avenue. So this is closer to the Forest Park. So we're looking at Kings Highway. So this is the Central West End area right here. And this was considered a much more like wealthy area, and people, banks and people were willing to give you loans to fix up your neighborhood. If you went a little bit far more north, however, then it changed a little bit. There are some yellow pockets. Here's Jennings Station Road. And so here is the line between the city and the county. So these are some of the North County areas that they even were deciding whether they were, quote, quote, gonna give you a loan or not give you a loan. And again, this was all based on that Housing and Lending Corporation's decisions. This wasn't something that people, normal people would decide. It was just the way they made it up. And what's also important to understand is that this is what starts to explain, the ways in which they treated and how some neighborhoods got to be started to fall down upon themselves because nobody would give them a loan in these areas to help fix up their house. So eventually they're not going to get the money to fix it up, and then suddenly it's going to start to fall apart. And that's not the people in these areas' fault. It's literally the United States government making those choices. So that was called redlining, and we'll add that to the notes. So we can say where people got unequal or were denied loans to fix houses or move neighborhoods. If you lived in an area where the HOLC, Housing and Lending Corporation, deemed it quote, quote, not good, red areas. And it's a really significant reason why our city, and if you drive through our city and took this map, I bet you could see a lot of areas reflecting the look of this map. Not all the areas would reflect it, but it was based on race where they decided to put the red zones. It certainly wasn't anything to do with the people. It certainly was nothing to do with the way those people were successful.